My name is Corinne Adler, and on the morning I was meant to walk down the aisle, I was 32 years old and trying not to shake. People call me steady, someone who keeps accounts balanced and tempers low, but steadiness is just fear in disguise when you've grown up in a house that cracked under shouting. I slipped into the back hallway of the church to breathe. The air smelled of lilies and floor polish. My heels clicked softly on the stone floor as I tried to slow my pulse. Behind me, the organist rehearsed the first chords of the procession. Then I heard it. Evan's voice. My brother's voice. The one that had mocked me since childhood, now wrapped in the laughter of his friends. "She thinks she's some kind of princess," he said, words slick with scorn, "but she's just a fat pig." The sentence landed like a physical hit, sharp and humiliating. For a second, all I saw was white veil, dress, walls until it blurred into one sickening wash of disbelief. Every small insult, every joke at my expense, folded together in that moment. I should have turned and stormed in, demanded he look me in the eye. Instead, something colder took over. I set my bouquet on the bench, slid my phone from its silk pouch, and pressed record. When his friend snickered, Evan added, "Wait till the toast, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of bride she really is." I let my fingers brush the back of a chair, making it scrape faintly against the wall. The voices stopped. Footsteps shifted closer. I steadied my breath, heart pounding, and tightened my grip on the phone. I lifted the latch and let the truth walk right in. When Evan's shadow filled the doorway, I didn't flinch. Years of practice had taught me how to hide every reaction, how to keep my face still while my stomach twisted. He brushed past me then, muttering something about needing air, and I stood there a moment longer, steadying my hands around the bouquet before walking back toward the light of the chapel. It's strange how one cruel sentence can peel open decades. We grew up in the foothills outside Asheville, where summer smelled of fermenting grapes and wood smoke. After our father died, the vineyard became the center of everything. I was 12. Evan 16, old enough for people to say he'd carry the family name. Our mother repeated that like a prayer while I learned to prune vines and balance the books. He drove the tractor twice, got bored, and spent the rest of that year managing ideas, even when he crashed Dad's truck into the creek. She told him boys made mistakes. When I misplaced a single invoice, she sighed that I had to be more careful if I wanted to help. That balance him adored. Me invisible shaped the air we breathed. Later, when he started a consulting firm that bled through my savings, he called it a misunderstanding. Mom defended him again, saying Evan only needed time to find himself. I found myself too sitting at the kitchen table, rewriting ledgers at midnight so the bank wouldn't see the overdraft. This wedding was supposed to stitch everything back together, a clean beginning for the family, proof that the Adlers still had grace. I told myself that's why I invited him, why I let him stand up there in a tailored suit beside my groom. Maybe I believed that love could rewrite memory. Before the ceremony, Mom sent me an old photo she'd framed for the reception. Evan grinning in front of the vineyard, sunlight in his hair. I was beside him once, holding a cluster of grapes. In the printed version, my arm is still there, but my face has been neatly cropped out. I stayed where the corridor curved, half hidden by the storage door and the smell of wax polish. Evan's laughter rolled down the hall, again loud, confident, certain no one would ever call him out. That certainty was his armor. It had been all our lives, he went on, his voice slick with arrogance. "You'll see it in her face when I give the toast. She'll know who the real Adler is." His friend snorted, the sound of a beer can cracking open punctuating the air. "Come on, man, she's your sister," the friend said. Evan chuckled. "All the more reason. She's been playing queen since Dad died. Maybe this'll remind her who built that vineyard." My thumb trembled, but I kept the phone steady. The red light blinked softly against my palm. I caught every syllable, every pause. Years of endurance had made me fluent in his tone, the way he could turn charm into a knife. The groomsmen began gathering near the door. Evan lowered his voice. "I'll make it funny." A joke about her diet or how Daniel must have nerves of steel. Their laughter scraped against my skin like sandpaper. In my bouquet pouch, the phone buzzed once Mia's signal. A single red heart, recording safe. My chest tightened with relief. She was at the sound booth, right where we'd planned she'd wait if I needed her. I hadn't told her everything, only that I feared a scene. That was enough for her to trust me. I could have stepped forward then, stopped him before the ceremony began. But I knew Evan too well. He'd twist it, turn it into another story about how I always ruined moments with my drama. So I stayed quiet, breathing through the burn in my throat. The organ began again in the chapel, the first notes of the processional echoing like a warning. I turned off the recording, slid the phone back into the bouquet, and smoothed my veil with hands that finally stopped shaking. If he wanted an audience, I would give him a stage. The church doors opened to a hush so complete I could hear my own pulse. Light poured through the stained glass, scattering color over the aisle. My fingers tightened around the bouquet until the stems bent slightly, cool against my palms. The phone was tucked between the ribbons, silent but heavy as if the truth itself had a pulse. Daniel stood at the altar, tall and calm, the kind of man whose steadiness filled a room without noise. His eyes found me as I took the first step forward, and for a heartbeat, everything cruel and chaotic dissolved. That was the thing about him he didn't promise perfection, only peace. Mia stood to my left, her hair swept into a clean knot, eyes catching mine briefly. She looked down, almost imperceptibly, and tapped her bracelet, twice our signal that the audio setup was ready. I felt the phone vibrate, a tiny tremor of confirmation that the world beyond my veil still existed. The minister's words blurred as I reached Daniel's side. His hand closed gently over mine. Warm. Certain. I thought of Evan standing behind him, best man in name only. The corners of his mouth curved in an easy smile that hid rot. The recording was safe. I could end it all right here. Interrupt the vows, turn, and let the congregation hear who he really was. But then Daniel squeezed my hand once, as if he could sense the war beneath my skin. His thumb brushed over my knuckles an anchor, a reminder of what this day was meant to be. I swallowed the impulse, choosing silence over spectacle. This moment wasn't his to ruin. The priest asked for the vows, and Daniel spoke first, his voice steady, promising honesty, kindness, partnership. When it was my turn, my throat trembled, but my words came out clear. I promised the same. Though the ache behind them was different, I was vowing never to let cruelty define me again. When the ceremony ended and applause filled the church, I caught Evan's smirk through the petals of my bouquet. I only smiled back, lips soft, grip firm. Mercy was my gift that morning. Justice would be my bouquet's second bloom. The reception hall overlooked the French Broad River, its windows open to the sound of water slipping over stone. Lanterns swung gently from the beams, and the air smelled of lilacs and champagne. For a few fleeting minutes, I let myself believe the day could still belong to peace. Daniel's hand rested on my back as guests clinked glasses, the string quartet easing into something soft and celebratory. Then Evan rose. His silver tie caught the light as he tapped his spoon against a glass, the clear chime cutting through the chatter. "A toast," he announced, voice smooth, confident. "To my little sister, the princess of the family." Laughter bubbled from a few tables. He grinned wider. "And to Daniel, the bravest man in North Carolina, willing to take on all that royalty." The room chuckled politely. I caught Mia's glance from across the hall waiting, poised near the sound console. I nodded once. Evan went on, pacing his words like a comedian who believed in his timing. "You know, When we were kids, Corinne used to boss me around in the vineyard, pretending to run the place. Guess some things never change. But hey, she finally found someone who doesn't mind being ruled by a queen. He paused for effect, smirk curling. A big-hearted queen. A few uneasy snickers flickered and died. I set my bouquet on the table, pressing the hidden button on my phone. Across the room, Mia bent slightly, making the quietest adjustment on the mixer. The hum of feedback flickered, then cleared. Evan laughed again, all jokes, people. That's what family's for, right? Then his own voice, cold and recorded, cut through the speakers. She thinks she's some kind of princess, but she's just a fat pig. The sound filled every corner of the lodge. Forks froze mid-air. Someone gasped, "My mother." Daniel straightened beside me, his hand sliding from my back to the table, knuckles white. Evan's grin collapsed. "That's not wait. That's edited." He stumbled toward the soundboard, shouting at Mia to stop. She stepped aside, calm and unflinching, as the recording finished with his laugh echoing back at him. Silence followed, thick and electric. I rose slowly, eyes level with his. The string lights above us trembled in the evening air. His laugh died before the last echo of mine began. The night after the reception. The house was too quiet. Only the sound of the river outside filled the gaps between words that hadn't been spoken. Daniel had gone to return the rental car, and I stood by the window, still in my wedding dress, holding a glass of water that tasted faintly of metal. My phone kept lighting up calls from my mother, from Evan, from numbers I didn't recognize. I answered none of them. When I finally picked up, it was Mom. Her voice came sharp, already tired of the scandal. "Corinne, what on earth possessed you? You humiliated your brother in front of everyone." He said that recording was spliced together by Mia. "You've always been too dramatic." I felt the old gravity return the familiar pull that said, "Don't argue, don't defend, just absorb." I swallowed hard. "He said it. Mom!" "You heard him. He told me it's fake." She replied quickly. "You know how technology is these days. Anyone can make people say things." Her voice softened, coaxing. "He's your brother. Don't throw away family over a misunderstanding." Before I could answer, another voice chimed in behind me. It wasn't edited. Mia stood in the doorway, holding her laptop. Her eyeliner had smudged, but her gaze was steady. She opened the file, clicking through the timeline untouched, complete, time-stamped from the church hallway. If anyone wants proof, I have backups in 3 drives. Mom went quiet. I could almost hear her disappointment bending toward fear. "You've made this ugly, Corinne, for both of you." Then the call cut off. Mia closed the laptop gently. "You okay?" I nodded, though my stomach twisted. He'll say anything to keep control. That word control stuck in my head long after she left. I went to my desk, pulled out the old ledger binders for Adler Vineyards, and began flipping through the pages. Dad's handwriting ended halfway through the last book. Evan's neat script took over, but the math didn't add up. Transfers labeled operational adjustments, checks to companies I'd never heard of. The air thickened as I penciled the differences on a notepad. My heart steady now, cold with focus. Humiliation fades, but numbers never lie. 3 weeks after the wedding, the vineyard's office still smelled faintly of sugar and fermenting skins. The harvest had begun early, and the workers moved like ghosts through the rows, careful not to meet my eyes. Word of the reception had traveled fast. People whispered that the Adlers were fighting again. I spent my mornings at the oak desk my father once used, surrounded by stacks of ledgers and unpaid invoices. Every page I turned was another small betrayal disguised as neat handwriting. Evan had made withdrawals under his own LLC. Adler Growth Consulting amounts just low enough to avoid attention. One checkbook entry read equipment maintenance, another branding expenses. The vineyard didn't own new equipment, and no one could recall a branding campaign. I gathered every suspicious sheet into a folder, the edges cutting small red lines into my fingers. paper wounds, harmless but stinging. When I called Victor Lamont, my father's old attorney, he invited me to his downtown Asheville office. The room was dim, lined with leather-bound case files and the scent of dust. Victor was in his 70s now, his glasses sliding down the bridge of his nose as he read through my notes. "You were right to bring this," he said quietly, tapping the folder. "If these withdrawals link directly to his LLC, it's embezzlement, family or not." The word hung heavy in the air. He asked for copies of the bank statements, vendor emails, and a certified copy of my father's will. I promised to have everything by the end of the week. That night, Daniel found me still awake, printing statements on the kitchen table. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "Maybe it's time to let it go," he said gently. "He's already humiliated. We could start fresh, away from all this." I looked up at him, ink smudged on my fingertips. "Peace isn't the same as silence," I said. "If I walk away now, he'll just find another way to take what isn't his." Daniel didn't argue. He only kissed the top of my head and turned off the kitchen light. Blood may be thick, but contracts are thicker. I drove to Mom's house on a gray afternoon when the air smelled like rain and old leaves. She was sitting on the porch swing, knitting something soft and pale, the same rhythm she used whenever she didn't want to talk about pain. The screen door creaked as I stepped out. "Mom, we need to talk about the vineyard," I said. She didn't look up. "Evan told me you're threatening him with lawyers." "Corinne, he's all I have left. Don't do this." The way she said left stung more than I expected. "Then you've already lost half of us," I answered quietly. Her knitting paused. Needles frozen midair. "You always think the world is against you," she whispered. "You've turned your wedding into a war zone, and now this. You're going to ruin what your father built." I swallowed the ache climbing up my throat. He already ruined it. "Mom, I'm just cleaning the blood off the books." She shook her head and turned away. The wind caught her gray hair, twisting it into thin, silver threads. I realized then that she wasn't going to stand beside me, not this time, maybe not ever. The next morning, I filed the civil suit with Victor's guidance. The courthouse clerk's pen scratched across the forms like the sound of doors closing. Within a week, local papers ran the story, "Adler Vineyard owner accuses brother of fraud." Reporters waited by the fence. Neighbors pretended not to stare when I passed them downtown. Through it all, Daniel stayed beside me. He went with me to every meeting, his hand always finding mine before we entered a room. When someone asked how he could live with the chaos, he smiled and said, "We don't run from storms. We build roofs." That night, standing outside the courthouse, I watched rain blur the glass doors into shimmering streaks. The reflection of the city lights looked like tears sliding down the sky. Tears it cried for me, for what had to be lost so truth could speak. The morning of the trial broke clear and cold, the kind of air that made breath visible, like proof you were still alive. The Buncombe County Courthouse rose from the fog, pale stone against the blue ridge beyond it. Inside, the hall smelled faintly of varnish and coffee. Evan arrived first, flanked by his attorney and that same swagger he'd worn all his life. His suit was new, his smile practiced. When he saw me, he gave a small, mocking nod as if we were siblings sharing a private joke. Mom sat behind him, hands clasped tight in her lap, eyes shining with forced calm. Daniel squeezed my shoulder once before taking a seat beside Mia in the gallery. The judge called the session to order. Victor stood with quiet authority, his silver hair reflecting the courtroom light. He laid out the documents one by one, bank statements, vendor emails, copies of the will, everything marked in red. Evan leaned back, smirking, as if paperwork couldn't touch him. Then Victor pressed play on the recording, the uncut version. Evan's voice poured through the speakers, raw and unmistakable. The words he'd spoken before my wedding filled the room, each syllable heavier than the next. Even the court reporter paused her typing. Evan's smirk faltered. He started to protest. but Victor was already holding up the invoice's false signatures, duplicated numbers, the proof of every lie. My mother's composure cracked. She covered her mouth, whispering his name like a prayer turned confession. When the verdict came, the judge's tone was steady, merciless. Evan was ordered to repay the misused funds and was permanently removed from any management of the vineyard. Before the gavel fell, I stood, my voice shook but carried. Bloodline isn't a contract for cruelty. The words settled into the wood-paneled silence, final and undeniable. Truth arrived late, but it did not apologize. By autumn, the vines had turned gold, the rose shimmered under the early dusk, and laughter gentler, freer floated from the tables we'd set between them. Long strings of lights swayed above the crowd, their glow soft against the deepening sky. Daniel poured wine while neighbors passed plates of roasted squash and bread still warm from the oven. The vineyard had survived, scarred but standing. So had I. Mia stood near the barn, leading a small circle of young women. Her voice carried over the music as she spoke about boundaries, money, and self-worth, how those things intertwine. I watched her hand gestures mirror mine when I used to explain budgets to the field staff. She caught my eye, smiled, and kept talking. At the edge of the gathering, a delivery driver approached with a small envelope. My name was written in my mother's precise, looping script. I stepped aside to open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting shaky but clear. You were right to speak. No apology, just acknowledgement. For us, that was enough language to start over, later, after the guests had gone. I sat on the porch with Daniel, the night heavy with the smell of rain and earth. He rested his arm around me as the last candles flickered out. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old tiara hairpin I once wore on my wedding day. Its rhinestones dulled with age. It was now looped through a small brass ring, a keychain I carried every day. The crickets hummed, the vines rustled, and the river murmured beyond the fields. The world, for once, was quiet. The last laugh wasn't noise. It was silence mine, filled with peace.